My name is Stanton Friedman. I'm a nuclear physicist with bachelor's and master's degrees in physics from the University of Chicago. 3 different careers, 14 years in industry, working on very exciting advanced nuclear and space system development programs, companies like General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, nuclear airplanes, fission and fusion rockets, nuclear power plants for space. I think I've worked on more canceled government-sponsored R&D programs than anybody. I got interested in flying saucers in 1958, gave my first lecture in 1967, and since that time I've spoken at more than 600 colleges, more than 100 professional groups in 50 states, 9 provinces, 4 other countries. I spent 12 years full-time lecturing about flying saucers, and over the last 12 years I've mixed research, writing, lecturing, communications activities, and a lot of nuclear consulting work. I take a clear-cut, unambiguous stand about flying saucers. The title of my lecture is Flying Saucers Are Real, and I mean it. That is to say that after 36 years of study and investigation, 4 major conclusions. 1, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some UFOs, underline the some 18 times, some are alien spacecraft. Most are not, and I really don't care about the ones that are not. Second, the subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate, meaning some few people within the governments of the United States, Canada, Britain, Russia, and a lot of other countries have known since July 1947, when 2 crashed flying saucers and about 8 alien bodies were recovered in New Mexico, that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Third, none of the arguments made by a very small group of noisy negativists against the first 2 conclusions stand up under careful scrutiny. The anti-arguments sound great until you look at the evidence and they collapse at their own weight. And finally, fourth, we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft and successful cover-up of the best data, bodies, and wreckage by the governments, especially the United States government, for 47 years. It's a very big story. Gerald Anderson came forward after the second running of the Unsolved Mysteries program. And I spent many days with him. Had him polygraphed. Now, he had one 53 or so minute conversation with Kevin on the phone. They never met. For some reason, it was a policy statement by these CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies, that it's a bogus site. And they tried 3 different schemes to take Barney Barnett out of the picture. First saying he lied to his wife, who was really to the east and rather than the west. And that's nonsense. In the first place, he didn't ever lie to anybody, as far as we can tell. Secondly, he always told his wife where he was going before he left in the morning, because there weren't phones out there, so she'd know that he might stay overnight out. And he worked out in the plains 40 different times that year, 47, never east of Socorro, and this is over 100 miles east and out in the boonies. It's out of his district. He certainly wasn't there. Then they said, well, he was programmed to disinform people. That makes no sense. He didn't disinform anybody. So I can find nothing on that. Gerald had come forward and said they made a mistake on the program, which they did make several mistakes. He said he was there with his much older brother, his uncle, his father, his cousin. There's a saucer stuck in the ground, bodies next to it, and he goes on, a lot of detail, and finally says the military showed up. And I'll never forget the nasty red-haired SOB who threatened to take me from my dad and all this kind of thing. And it was with a black sergeant. He was okay. Now, he had no way of knowing that just 2 weeks before, the second time around with Glenn Dennis, the mortician, I was asking him to describe the officers who had given him a hard time. And I didn't transcribe the conversation. It was on tape. And he was saying they weren't from the base. That was a key thing I wanted to know, that he recognized them. No, they weren't from there. Never saw them again, never saw them before. And there was a black sergeant, and he had told me there was a nasty red-haired SOB, the officer who threatened him. Now, here's Gerald 2 weeks later coming up with this crazy combination of a red-haired officer and a black sergeant. Crazy because the Army wasn't desegregated until 48. And I think I have an explanation for that, in that, incidentally, when I was giving a talk at White Sands Missile Range, there were some old-timers who were talking about Sandia Base. Gerald had said that the family said that the security people, this red-haired guy and so forth, were from Sandia, which makes sense. Very highly classified base in Albuquerque, surrounded by Kirtland. And the guy's telling me over lunch before I speak that you could go from Sandia to Kirtland, but you couldn't go from Kirtland to Sandia without a special clearance. And Sandia had a triple fence, usually 2 of them electrified, and dogs. And they came out one morning, and here's a couple of wetbacks, drunk as skunks, and they couldn't figure out how did they miss the dogs and the electricity. Well, one of the black sergeant had said to Glenn Dennis. Glenn got mad at this guy bossing him around. Get him out of here. Don't say anything. Don't ever talk. He doesn't know what they're talking about. He says, you can't do anything to me. I'm a civilian. Sergeant says, use guys like you for dog food. Glenn says, we use guys like you for coyote bait. Great dialogue. But the dog food remark is a very peculiar one. I happen to know of a black sergeant who handled the dogs on a SAC base, security detail. That was one of the places where the blacks could work. Kitchen was another, incidentally. And if you look at the Roswell yearbook, the whole Kitchen group is black. So there was no way that Gerald could know of that conversation. I hadn't told anybody. It was in person, not on a phone, so if anybody was listening to me, they wouldn't have gotten it. So that got my attention. And we did a lot of checking on him. We also found other people who substantiated crash in the planes. Had a little letter in the Socorro Daily News Defensor, I think it is, Defensor Chieftain, strange little paper, weekly. Anybody who knew Barney Barnett, called me collect, gave a number. A man named Harold Baca called me. He lived across the street from Barney. And Barney had told him that he thought he got his cancer from being exposed to bodies next to the saucer out on the plains. I found a cowboy, Johnny Ford, lived in Magdalena, which is the main town, if you can call it that, going out to the plains from Socorro. He remembered a discussion about crash saucers, even came up with the name of the guy who was there and said he was going to go out to that area right near where Gerald said this was. And so I found a postmistress, Hart, who remembers the story and remembers what she had heard. Postmistresses hear a lot in small towns, was that it had been brought through Magdalena at night on a flatbed truck, tarps around it and stuff. So there's other testimony too. Barney's boss, Barney Barnett's boss, Fleck Danley. We talked to him, 15 years ago, Bill Moore talked to him. He remembered Barney saying it. He's the one who came up with the date, first part of July. We didn't ask him if that the date. We asked him what the date was and the location out in the plains. And then when we get Ruth Barnett's diary, 40 different days in 47 he worked out in the plains, Barney did. None east of Socorro. And on the very day when I think things happened, July 2nd, he was out in the plains. I think that's why Kevin wanted to come up with a different scenario, a different date. Get rid of Barney. He tried 3 different attempts, didn't work, so we know Barney wasn't out there on the 5th. That's when the crash occurred.
So I assume that you're still probing into the case.
Oh, yes. I've got a number of leads to follow up now, and I got one today.
Is there anything since the book, Crash at Corona, that you can share with us?
Well, we have more witnesses. I found a woman, how did I find her? Her grandson told somebody that his grandmother had once said something, and with a lot of work, I found the grandmother. She was living in Las Cruces, comes from a wealthy family, and somebody she knew, a truck driver, had told her that he had seen a saucer and bodies out on the plains, and he named 2 other people. And I was able, not too long ago, to track down relatives of those other 2 people, and the daughter of the man, the guys are dead now, happened to be at home when her father said something to her mother about the crash. And he was a game warden, I guess, and he had led an FBI man to the location. And so we've got a lot of this kind of stuff. There are others with regard to Roswell. There was just an article in UFO magazine about a new guy who came forward. I haven't checked him out, so I can't verify anything there, but I'm told he is in the yearbook, which is always a good check. I think that all the fuss about this silly Air Force proclamation will hopefully bring other people out of the woodwork, as will hopefully the Larry King show that's going to happen on October 1st.
This sort of anticipates my next question. Carl Flock recently released a report called Roswell in Perspective, where he offers
the mogul balloon explanation, basically. Although he does buy the bodies because he talked to I gave him the number of the medical technician guy.
How do you evaluate that study?
Well, Carl did a lot of good work, and he was especially good about new witnesses and the new scenario. His discussions with Kaufman and so forth are very good. I think that if you look carefully, now he talked to C.B. Moore, the head of the Mogul Project. Now, Don Berliner and I had talked to him. Bill Moore had talked to him over a decade ago. I think that he was taken in a little bit because Moore's positiveness, C.B. Moore, was based on the interview with the rancher Mac Brazel on July 8th, 1947, which appeared in the newspaper July 9th. We know that Brazel was programmed for that interview. He had been grabbed by the military. We've got family, his son says that happened. People who saw him in town with the military and he wasn't free to talk. Frank Joyce, the newsman, he comes in with this whole different story. In that interview, he describes a balloon, okay. And so it's not surprising that C.B. Moore says, well, you know, you look at the description of sticks and rubber and all this stuff, it's a balloon. Of course, we know that Brazel had recovered balloons twice, and the date he gave, June 14th, well, that takes it out of all the modern flying saucer stuff. So that connection is a phony one programmed by the Air Force. And if that took care of it, how come they staged the launch themselves the very next day over at White Sands? I mean, over at Alamogordo Army Airfield, right next to White Sands, of weather balloons with radar reflectors. Doesn't make any sense. I was the one, I had a researcher who was looking through the papers there and found that headline. Fantasy of flying disc explained here. Now, that's not a major newspaper, Alamogordo Daily News, but it went out on the wire. And that put an end to all these sightings that had occurred. I get a real kick out of the Air Force statement. There were 16 sightings. Some UFO buffs claim 800. Well, I've got the report. It's that thick. 853 in July and August 1947.
That's the official count, right?
Well, that's what this guy found by checking newspapers across the country. A man named Ted Blocher, and he has another 700 that he found later, more traveling.
So that kind of gives the lie to one of Flock's contentions that part of the problem with identifying the debris is that they called it parts of a flying disc without yet knowing exactly what flying disc was.
Flying disc was a generic term.
Right.
You see, what people tend to forget is that the Mogul balloon program did not employ sophisticated technology in terms of the structures that were involved. Balloons are balloons, and there were neoprene or polyethylene. It was the first time they were using polyethylene. But the notion that Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer for the only atomic bombing group in the world, who had hundreds of combat hours in the Pacific, who had seen loads of balloon launches, was himself a pilot before the war, that neither he nor Colonel Blanchard could recognize a wreckage from a weather balloon or any kind of balloon, non-exotica kind, whose material any 3-year-old can tear, mind you, when we've got 3 kinds of material that defy that conventional explanation. One of them is this very lightweight foil-like stuff that you could crumple and unfold. A lot of testimony about that. Another was the I-beam-like pieces, and I've talked to Jesse Marcel Jr., who sketched the I-beam and the symbols along the beam. That was extraordinarily lightweight, the weight of balsa wood. Some people said he thought it was balsa wood. No. I was the first to talk to Jesse Sr., and I've talked to Jesse Jr. The weight of balsa wood, standard material for saying lightweight, you know. Couldn't cut it, couldn't break it, couldn't burn it. Now, balsa wood fails all those tests. And then this little heavier stuff, metallic sort of material that you couldn't break through with a sledgehammer. Make great skin for a rocket or a vehicle or airplane. We don't have anything like that, even to these days, you know. So, and none of that appears on a Mogul balloon.
Okay, let's kind of veer away from that topic for right now because of your background as a nuclear physicist and working on all kinds of systems. And, of course, recognizing that you favor an extraterrestrial origin for these craft.
I came to that conclusion. I didn't start with that, but I'm stuck.
Okay. What are some of the propulsion systems that a civilization might develop to get from one star to another?
Well, okay, first we have to narrow the field a little bit. We don't want to talk about other galaxies here, just the local neighborhood, you know. Not billions of light years, but 37. Distance is Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli. Okay, I have worked on nuclear fission propulsion systems. A nuclear reactor about 7 foot wide, power level 4,400 megawatts was one that was tested out in the nuclear test site. I'm really more excited. I worked on nuclear fusion more than 30 years ago. This is what goes on in the sun, H-bombs. If you use the right stuff in the right way and kick particles out the back end of a fusion rocket that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in the dumb old chemical rocket, on a miles per gallon basis, fusion is the way to go. There are a whole host of other schemes. One of them might be having a big laser here. You zap the back of the craft and it spalls off material which goes this way and the rocket goes that way. That puts the power supply not on the vehicle. There's always the use of cosmic freeloading. All our deep space probes use the gravitational fields of the planets on the way out. We don't need to supply the energy. The planet supplies it. God supplied it. Okay. There's kind of an analogy here. When you go from the big fat atom to the tiny nucleus, you can down in size by a factor of 10,000 and up in energy by 10 million per particle. That sounds weird, but that's the way it is. Okay, now we're flitting around inside the nucleus for subnuclear world. Again, you go down in size, undoubtedly up in energy that's involved. So when we learn how to handle that, we could probably make a propulsion system out of it. There is also, though, the astrophysicists love it, fourth dimensional space-time warping. Warping space and popping from here to there without being in between. I don't know how to do that, so I don't worry about it. But the key thing you have to understand here, Friedman's law, named after me, by me, modestly, of course, and that is that technological progress almost invariably comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future's not an extrapolation of the past. Lasers aren't better light bulbs. Nuclear rocket engines aren't just better chemical rockets. Micro-integrated circuits are not small vacuum tubes. New physics. Well, we've only had advanced technology for like 100 years. What if somebody's got a little head start on us, say 1 billion years? 1 million? 1,000? Who in his right mind is going to say he knows what the technology 1,000 years from now will be, no less now? So we're technologically unsophisticated on a cosmic neighborhood basis.
Sure.